think we'll go ahead and jump right into this, get started. So again, thank you everyone for joining our webinar on night vision, security cameras, night vision solutions, features. And what we're going to talk about today is the challenges of low light. We're going to talk about the sort of the industry flow, the industry evolution of night vision. So, that goes in from infrared to color night vision to the new ChromaIQ stuff that we're introducing. And then we'll also talk about how to improve your current night vision cameras without, buying and replacing cameras too. There's options there. And of course, at the end, if we have time, we'll do some extra Q&A as well. So if you're new to us, if you're unfamiliar with SCW, we are a value-driven company that provides end-to-end security solutions. So whether you are looking for a net new turnkey system that we install for you, happy to do that. Or if you're looking to do more of a self-install, we can do install across the entire nation. Um, so yeah, seeing in the dark, why is this so difficult? Well, um, all cameras work by gathering light. So whether that's your iPhone camera, your Galaxy camera, or a security camera, you know, they have to gather light to produce that image, right? And the more light, the sharper and clearer an image will typically be. So, and the lower the light, as the opposite, the lower the light, the harder and more noisy that image is going to be. We lose details. We just like our eyes, right? You go outside at night and it's dark, you have a hard time seeing. Cameras don't act too much differently compared to our eyes. Um, and again, that's why when you take a low light photo with sort of any camera type, it's typically grainier, less sharp, probably more blurry than one if you were taken right during, middle of the day. So we're going to go into a little bit of like how this all works because this is important to understand, when you're looking at a security camera, what's really important, right? There's a lot of things out there when it comes to marketing on security cameras that, it's hard to actually tell what's actually going to get you a good night vision solution. And um, so how light is gathered is by a couple different things. First off, the lens. That's specifically the aperture of the lens, how wide it opens up. Um, that's going to let in more light, so the larger it is, more light. There's also the sensor size, which matters. So, like, the larger the sensor, the more area it has to basically collect that light. And then also the shutter speed matters. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So, why am I talking about kind of like shutter speed and all this stuff when we're talking about security cameras? Well, the key word there is they're cameras, right? Security cameras are still cameras, and they play by the same rules as, a DSLR, the iPhone cameras. But the difference is like security cameras have to work 24/7, 365 days a year. That includes 3 a.m. in the morning, 4 a.m., 12:30. Um, and low light video as well as another part of this is harder than stills. You guys may notice if you have a newer phone, most of them now have sort of like a night mode where they'll, gather light for about 3 or 5 seconds, whatever, when you're holding it. And then, it kind of able to gather that light and make a decent picture. It uses AI and all that stuff nowadays to kind of stitch it. Video obviously doesn't have that same advantage, right? It can't it has to be real time, so video is even harder. Um, so how do we actually see at 3 a.m.? So usually we need to have some kind of light, right? Um, how have we provided that light in the past with security cameras? The first type is something we call infrared lighting. Infrared lighting is still probably the most common choice for night vision in the industry. So infrared light, if you look at any security camera, you'll see, like on the bottom of this one particularly, you'll see these kind of like lights down here, LED lights. They're typically infrared lights on the bottom of them. And it's basically a light source that is invisible to our eyes. If you look closely, you'll see a little bit of a red glow on the LEDs, but you're not going to see like the ground lit up with it or anything like that. And that provides light to the camera that we can't see. So it's basically an invisible light. Now that go ahead and take a look at this now. We'll go ahead and jump over to some of the night vision look here. So you'll see kind of what a typical infrared night vision camera looks like, right? It's monochrome, sort of basically black and white, although it's like gray and white. But um, the pros of it is that it is nearly invisible. So, if you're in an area where maybe you're sensitive to light being on and you want it to be a little darker, that's an advantage to it. The other thing as well is infrared light can go a very long distance. We have cameras that can send infrared light almost 1,000 feet away. We've had ones that actually were even further out back in the day with like a laser. Pretty crazy. But um, and the other thing about it too is it's affordable and effective. This has been a technology that's sort of tried and true. Um, Now, the main downside to infrared lighting is, of course, the fact that we don't have any color. It's monochrome, right? And nowadays, color is a very important part of any evidence, right? When somebody, especially in a real-time scenario, you need to figure out, are they wearing a gray shirt, a blue shirt? If you need that kind of detail, the camera can't provide it. It makes it a lot less likely to be able to react in a real manner. Um, the other thing with infrared light, it is prone to reflection. You do have to be a little bit careful when you're installing it. You have to consider what it's hitting, etc. We'll talk about that a little bit when we go over like the placement and stuff too. So we know we want color because we want those details, right? That's the thing is like color night vision isn't just for looks, it's not just kind of a gimmick. Nowadays we have a lot more people who are actively monitoring their cameras. AI has totally um changed what we can do with security cameras. So now, having active your cameras act um as eyes for a remote guarding station, for example, is a more common scenario than it was just a couple years ago, right? And that's all thanks to AI. But those remote guards, when they're calling the police when you have a break-in or something suspicious happened, they need all the detail and you know classifications that you could possibly need. They're going to want to know the shirt color, pants color, what color car it is, so the police can take a look at it. If they know it's a Toyota Corolla potentially, there's thousands of them, probably in your city, right? If they know it's a blue one that just left that area, it's going to be a lot easier to kind of narrow that down. Um, and of course, as part of AI too, we also have cameras that do color search. That means that you can go in your system and search for somebody wearing a gray shirt or somebody who looked in a blue car. And you want that to work during both the day and night. A lot of events do happen at night. So the question becomes, how do we get color at night? So, how it started, the term color night vision and, offering color night vision has been around for, I mean, as long as 5 to 10 years now. There's been ones kind of advertising and promising this kind of color night vision. And to be honest with you, most of them were pretty gimmicky, right? What they did is they lowered the shutter speed. And we talked about that a little bit, but when you lower the shutter speed, just like when you're holding your phone and it holds it there for 3 seconds, um, what that means is that the motion becomes less clear. So when nothing's happening in the image, and you'll notice on the marketing, they won't show somebody moving around. They'll show like a street or a field or a parking lot or something like that, but nothing's moving on these images or video. Um, it looks great, because they've lowered the shutter speed, they're letting in more light to the camera. But the downside to that is that if you actually had footage where people were walking around or cars were moving, they would just be smears and blurs across the screen, kind of like this. You can see that as he moves around, we got the shape that this is a person, but there's no detail in the face because the shutter speed is set so low that it's just blurring that all away. So, um, and so when people bought these cameras, they were expecting the best night vision they've ever seen, and instead they felt like they were burned by it. And so it sort of went away for a little bit there. People weren't really talking about as much. Infrared kind of just sort of went back to being the standard approach for this. Um, so then what was the kind of next generation? Well, obviously, like we mentioned in the beginning, that cameras need light, right? So whether that's infrared light or potentially white light. So white light is just a standard light that we have and we know. So basically, people started replacing the infrared lights on the cameras with white light LEDs. And the benefits here are we got color, right? So color night vision now becomes more possible in a real sense when you have a white LED shining off the camera. But the big consideration is obviously white light. And so the problem with that for a lot of people is that it's they don't necessarily want the entire area to be lit like that, right? So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. Um, I think that when we look at the white lighting option, what you can see here on this camera, just kind of shining it off there, is the pros of it is it does offer some form of color footage, right? Um, and it can act as a deterrent as well. So that's another thing to consider is that um, some people want their security cameras to be a little bit more stealthy. Others want them to be, more apparent, more of an actual deterrent. And I think like when you consider the fact that most people understand it's basically like you duct tape the flashlight to the camera, right? It's pretty easily understood. You can understand the placement. You can see the placement, so it's a little easier to install than maybe infrared. But the considerations of it are it's entirely visible, so there's no way of getting around that. Um, and then the other two things to consider with white light, excuse me, is that it's not as long range. It's pretty rare to find a white light camera that's more than maybe 100 feet typically, whereas infrared, there are options that can go much further. And of course, it's also very direct too. In my experience looking at a lot of white light cameras, you'll see that it's more of that flashlight effect where it kind of is in a special area. It doesn't quite as go across the entire image as much as infrared does. So, you are kind of sacrificing range and probably surface area being covered with white light. And so the other option that sort of came out after that, so we're on kind of our third one. We've gone infrared, white light cameras, and then there's hybrid options. So as I mentioned, analytics have gotten better with cameras. Like if for the people who are on our polls right now, a lot of them, a little bit more than half, about half of them have camera systems that are older than 2 or 3 years old, including a couple with 4.5, 5 years old, and a couple that have 6+ years old. And you know, this has been one of the biggest drivers in, people wanting upgrades on their camera system is the access to analytics. And so we can, for example, when it comes to the low light, what that allows us to do is to be able to turn that white light on demand when a person is being detected. And that makes that white light a lot less intrusive, and it acts more as an active deterrent feature than maybe having it on 24/7. So let's take a look at that. And you'll see this is actually real footage that we had. Get this out here. Um, in the back of our warehouse here. This person had been coming to our warehouse for a couple of days. We installed, a couple of active deterrence cameras. So, obviously this includes the white light, but it also includes a speaker. So it's actually actively yelling at them as well. But you'll see that if I pause it here, you'll see that this is a typical infrared night vision setting. It's very, very dark over here, and it does a very good job of lighting up this very dark area. There's no external lighting back here. Even the moon really doesn't touch it, to be honest with you, just with the way it hits over there. So it is very, very dark. And we can see this guy walking up to the kind of area where the camera is. And as soon as the camera detects him, it turns on that white light. You can see it happens very, very quickly. And in fact, our newer generation happens even quicker. And then it gives us a color night vision image. So you can see now, the difference between seeing what this person is wearing here versus what he's wearing here. Um, is a very big difference, right? We can see that he is wearing light blue jeans, a Carhartt hoodie with a white undershirt. He's got a backpack. The hoodie is black, whereas obviously look over here, there's not even that, you have very little details at all. So and then of course because it's also playing that audio effect, it scares him away as well. So that acts as you can, and by the way, the audio is optional, so you can choose to turn that on and just turn on the white light. So So obviously that acts as a deterrent, but it also gives us that color detail that we may need for, the police or just evidence in general. So when we talk about the hybrid lighting, it's color footage when you need it, and that's the biggest pro. You don't have to have that constant white light on. Obviously, it can also act as a sort of a surprise deterrent, as you could see in that case. And there are some considerations too. So you are going to have like a little bit of a slight lag time when it does switch between that infrared um, to the white light. It takes half a second or so. It's not that much like you can see in there, but it is something to consider. Also, still relying on that detection. So, the further the person out, the less likely they are going to be to be detected. It is based on a video analytic. And it's still a direct white light. It did pretty good in that scenario, but it's still, just a white light. So those are kind of the three options that have been on the table for really the last 3 or 4 or longer years, right? We've kind of evolved from infrared to white light to hybrid. Um, Really, what's next? And um, that would be our Chroma IQ night vision technology. And, when we talk about I think I mentioned the word like 20 times already in this thing, and we barely even touched this part. So, AI is everywhere, right? We can't escape it. It's advertised to us, it's everywhere. And we typically, in the security field, think about analytics, like the ability to search for, specific color shirt, specific color vehicle, maybe our trace search feature, if you haven't seen that, where we can find somebody across the facility. Um, but what about image quality? What if it could help improve, the image quality that we're getting from these cameras? And that's kind of what the idea of the Chroma IQ technology is. And so I'm going to show you this night vision footage here. And pause it over here as well. I have a couple of examples over here, but this is at 3:43 in the morning, so about as dark as it gets. And this is me walking around with my iPhone, right? So you can see, and this is a pretty accurate. I would say it's a little brighter than it actually is in the real, and to my eyes in the real world. But this is a fairly accurate representation of the lighting level here at this part of the office. It's not we're not lighting it up like a Christmas tree or anything like that. It's one light on the corner over there, basically. So, oops, excuse me. We go back to that. Move my mouse. And then you'll see here, me in front of the Chrome one of our Chroma IQ cameras. You can see just how much brighter that looks like. And of course, here's also the same scene and with a standard infrared camera. You'll notice again, no color details. My face is kind of washed out. And here I am walking across. And this is also with no white light on the camera at all, by the way. So there's no white light shining out. This is just gathering whatever light is in the area and using it to give us a night vision image that, is pretty remarkable. And you'll notice too, one of the cool things about this technology is I mentioned with white light, right? That it's very flashlighty. There's a drop off with it, but you'll notice even as I go further away from the camera, I don't kind of turn into like a blur or anything like that. I keep going there. And then here's another example over here. So this is on the other side of our warehouse. Like I mentioned, it's very, very dark over here. Um, and every camera's a little different. We'll talk about the different options there. But this particular camera does have a white light option in it. It's more of like a diffuse white light. It's not a very direct white light, but just there to kind of give a little bit of light to the camera. But you'll notice how dark it actually is here. There's zero external lighting. You can kind of see my phone can't even pick up the ground over here. And then here is actually me walking in with the Chrome IQ camera there. So same model we just saw in the corner. And so you can see that this is quite a big step up from the other stuff we've seen so far. And how does it actually work? So it's really a two-pronged approach when it comes to the cameras that we designate as Chroma IQ models, right? So the first thing is the camera fundamentals, and then we also have a new AI image processor, which we'll talk about. So the first thing is, why did I go on that thing about shutter speed and apertures and all this kind of stuff? Well, because it's important, right? It's something that um, every camera fundamentally needs to have. So all the Chroma IQ cameras are built with low light hardware in mind. So larger sensors, larger aperture lenses, and of course the image processor as well. So to give you reference to that in a little bit more specifics, so our best Chrome IQ models have a f1.0 or f1.2 lens. A lot of security cameras out there have an f2.0. Now I know that doesn't mean a lot to everybody, but to put that in reference, an f1.0 lens lets in 4 times more light than an f2.0. So essentially what that tells you is this is going to let in 4 times more light, our best models, than a typical security camera out there. And as we've kind of established, more light, better image quality. Now we also move on to the sensor. Again, our best models in the Chrome IQ line have a 1/1/8 image sensor. And again, this is where it's hard to put this in practicality, but a lot of other cameras have a 1/3 image sensor. That's 2.2 times larger. So again, the larger the sensor, the better light it can gather as well. So 2 times more light when it comes to that as well. And then sort of the secret sauce of this, right, is every camera, and again, whether it's your iPhone, your DSLR, or your security camera, all feed that image that that sensor gathers, the light that that sensor gathers into what's known as an image processor. And this processor is responsible for turning that light into an actual picture or video. Um, and of course, while it's doing that, it's doing things like helping out with the noise that gets introduced into an image. It enhances the colors and helps reduce the blur and all that kind of stuff. And what Chrome IQ does is it takes it to a brand new level. The image processor in here was tuned with um, billions of images. It's there to um, do things in real time for the video, and we'll show kind of what that looks like. But there's pixel level improvements with this. There's 9 processes it uses, including um, color and contrast, like I mentioned, detail, noise reduction, blur and smear reduction, color 24/7, like I said. We'll show you kind of quickly what this looks like in like a real-time kind of approach. And um, just to clarify too, when we look at this, this is all happening in real time, right? This isn't something that happens after the fact. Whether you're looking at it live or on the playback, it's going to look identical. But this is just sort of showing you sort of what's going on with the camera when it's in this process. So it's starting off with this raw image collection, which you can see is very dark. It works to brighten shadows and enhance things, color the image, more brightening here, fixing up the white balance, help restoring some of that color after that, sharpening up the details, and then getting into the pixel level noise reduction. And
Wild.
then that's kind of the ultimate end of it. So if you kind of look at the beginning of what that looked like in the beginning, which was just like a dark mountain kind of scene, to this green lush landscape, that's all happening in real time. And then I have one other example video here. This is with our one of our newer cameras, the Viking 8.0. That's just another example of kind of what this looks like. So mute myself here. So just to give you reference, I'm here at night again at our facility, and I'm just kind of showing off this area over here, which has a standard street light. And then as I pan over, you're also going to see kind of the other area here with not a lot of lighting. Um, and I just want to show kind of like a porch light over there as well, just to give you a reference on, how bright that looks like. This is a new iPhone 17 Pro Max, or so it's about as good as you can get from the phone world. And then we move over to excuse me, our our warehouse over here. And you can see that the warehouse there's no external lighting over here. It's very, very dark. Um, and I'm going to pan over one more time to kind of show you the other area over here. Actually, I just skipped to just kind of give you again an idea of like a commercial level facility is almost, looks very, very bright to the camera because there's a lot of lighting over there at that's actually New Belgium Brewery. So if you like their beers and you're on the East Coast, that comes from here. Um, but as I pan back over here, I'm going to start walking towards the camera, which you can't even see yet, but it's actually over here. And on the bottom right, you'll actually see the video from the Viking 8.0 security camera. And so you can just see like the contrast here of, in a second here, we might be able to see the camera. There we go. Yep. I'll kind of go around it or as well, just to kind of get you a better idea of like how dark it is. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's just a great example again. Everyone kind of knows what their phone looks like at night. Um, but just to kind of compare and contrast that, it's pretty wild, honestly.
Yeah, I
So
think
let's,
that first of all, shout out to waking up at 3 a.m. to do that video.
I think this one was more like midnight or something. But yeah, the
Okay.
first one was definitely 3 a.m.
Yeah.
I just got back from a trip to Japan and my sleeping was I woke up bright awake at 3 and I'm like I should do the video now. Like what a
Yeah.
good timing. But yeah.
Love that.
All right, so now what are the cameras that have this technology? So we've recently expanded this. We used to have one model that had this new technology and it's trickled out to some of our more other popular models. In the next couple of years, I expect this to eventually come to all of our models, but yeah, obviously, technology moves at a as fast as it can, especially now with all the I'm not sure if you guys saw, but Apple just increased their prices by like 20% or some crazy stuff. So technology is sort of like moving at the pace it can with everything else that's the shortages and all that. So but the first couple models, these are our most affordable models with this technology. It's our 4 megapixel ones. Um, and the interesting thing about these ones, they have zero infrared option as well at all. So the only option they have is that simple diffuse white light. And again, that white light only turns on in very dark environments. So it's automatic. You can actually turn it off if you want to. Um, but it's there only in the most dark scenarios. So for example, the one that we saw that was kind of me in the main kind of driveway parking area of that, that one never turns on. It's even in like a darker night, it's there's enough ambient lighting in the area for it never to turn on. Our next one are the fix, what we call the V5 Fix series. So these are our most popular models. We actually just released this, I believe on June 1st, or around there. And these have historically been our most popular models because they're 4K, 8 megapixel models. They have a lot of features built into them, like the color search, the actor deterrence, two-way audio, etc. And we just recently updated these with larger image sensors, larger apertures, and then of course, most importantly, the ChromaIQ image processor as well. And so, we have a dome, a bullet, and a turret camera option. So the Warrior and Paladin um, our bullet option. The Informant over here is our dome, and then the Deputy is our turret model. Now, one cool thing I'll just point out here too, specifically about the dome. This is our first dome with white light and active deterrence as well. So, for those who want to have the protection that a dome offers, this is an IK10 protection dome, but still want to use it outside, still want to get great night vision results. This is one of the first models out there in the industry that allows you to kind of get the best of both worlds. So. Um, and the cool thing about these two is they have dual lighting. So they have both infrared and white light and the Chrome IQ option all built into it. So you don't have to kind of pick and choose. You can choose maybe you have an area where it is very dark and you prefer doing the dual light option that when somebody walks in front of it, it turns it on. Or maybe you have enough light and it's never going to turn those, the infrared or the white light on at all. So, there's flexibility with these that's really great as well. And then finally, the other ones that just recently got them earlier this year is the varifocal models that we call the Viking and Detective. So these are basically our ultimate general use security cameras. They've got a motorized lens that can zoom in and zoom out, so you can get a super wide angle field of view, or you can zoom it in to get a little bit more detail. Gives you a lot of flexibility. These also have a much larger sensor and aperture than the fixed lens series, so they're naturally going to be better at low light as well. And then there's other upgrades on these as well beyond just you can see that with the um, they have the red and blue flashing lights for the active deterrence as well, so just a little bit more obvious, a louder speaker as well. So, but yeah, these are also now ChromaIQ, probably our best night vision cameras actually across the board. So that is kind of the introduction of the night vision technologies that exist. Just to recap one more time, we went from infrared, which still exists and is going to exist in this industry for a very, very long time, to kind of white light, to dual lighting, to now the Chroma IQ technology, improving the night vision process for us. So now we're going to talk about improving the night vision on your current existing cameras without replacing stuff. And um, physical placement is honestly like when I came from a support background, so I had a lot of calls on, especially for people who are self-installing it, DIYers out there, that hey, my night vision isn't looking very good, and the vast majority of those calls were related to the physical placement of the camera, right? So if you look at this image over here on the top, you'll see that, um, let me see, yeah, I have a bigger image here. That the infrared light is essentially just kind of smashing on this wall, right? You can see it's glowing. It's very, very bright, but we don't necessarily care about the wall. We're not really concerned about Spider-Man climbing up the wall. We probably want to know what's going on over here in the darker areas, and we can't even actually really see anything over here because of what that looks like. So the key thing is, you know, IR or white light, again, it's sort of like a flashlight, right? So when you're pointing that around, kind of consider that, right? If you were pointing a flashlight halfway on the wall, you know that it's going to affect kind of how far it can go. And so when we move this camera just a little bit over to the right, you can see the difference in night vision. It's able to utilize that entire IR to the area we care about. But then also number two, it's not really tricking. The camera kind of knows that it needs to change its image settings to adjust to it as well. Because over here, it's thinking, hey, this is actually a pretty bright image. Let me kind of reduce my settings and all that kind of stuff. So it thinks it's bright, but in reality, it's very dark. But just by moving it just a little bit over, it makes a very, very big difference. So. The other major factor, and this is especially true in two scenarios. Number one, if you've got dome cameras that you're installing, you have to be very careful about dome cameras when you're installing them because you don't want fingerprints, you don't want grease, you don't want grime to get on that dome inside or out. Because what can happen with that is the infrared will actually bounce off, and so it will make it more difficult for the infrared to get out, and then it will bounce kind of inside the actual thing and affect the image quality. The other side of that, whether it's a dome camera or any other type of camera, is that, dirt, grime, dust, pollen, all that kind of stuff will eventually, again, especially in an outside environment or in a manufacturing environment or like kitchens, stuff like that, all that stuff can start to build up on the cameras and will affect your night vision. Again, just like a flashlight, put a bunch of dirt on a flashlight, it's not going to be as bright as it was before, right? So one of the things that you can do to help, especially if you feel like, man, my cameras, I thought they used to be a lot cleaner or used to be a lot brighter and at night, now they just seem a little dim, is to just give them a clean. We'll send off a little short video that we made on how to clean security cameras with this. It's really, really simple. All you have to do is get a spray bottle with some water. I recommend distilled water. First off, just you know, blow off the dirt and dust off of it first, spray it down with water, and then clean it with a nice clean microfiber cloth gently. You don't need any chemicals, you don't need Windex, stuff like that. And here's a really good example of a situation where, night vision can be in it, can kind of sneak up on you, right? So here is an image during the day, everything looks great, perfect image. And then here it is, the same exact camera, same night at night, right? And we see this kind of string over here. And this is actually a spider web that's basically probably invisible to our eyes, right? And it's because that infrared is turned on, it's sort of like illuminating it and obviously affecting the night vision quality. This can get a lot worse too. But if you're on an older camera that uses motion detection and isn't using analytics, this can also cause your motion detection to go off all night as it moves around in the wind. So here's another example of a spider. You'll see that again, especially at night, spiders love putting webs in front of cameras because bugs get close to cameras, and so they can literally entirely block your view by putting a web or just kind of being in front of it. So it's important to kind of clean that stuff off when you start to notice it. And here's some other examples too. Like there's a difference between a clean one on the left and something that either got dusty or somebody's fingerprints or just, it doesn't take very much, especially on a dome camera, to get that sort of foggy effect that you see over there. So cleaning is definitely one of the big things, especially for those people who responded that they have older camera systems. Honestly, even if you have a camera system that's just a couple years old, and if you haven't cleaned your cameras, especially outside ones, it's probably not a bad idea to do that at least on a yearly or biannually basis, depending on where you are. If it's a dirtier place or like places where dirt's kind of shooting up in the air and stuff like that, you may want to do it a little bit more frequently. So now the other part of this too is, part of what I've been talking about this entire webinar is the fact that light matters to cameras. We're talking about getting more light with the apertures, getting more light with we're trying to gather as much light as possible. Well, one simple way of making your night vision better is simply just adding more lighting to your facility. So I mean, something as simple as a solar motion light can make a camera more effective. Um, Again, placement does matter here. You don't want to point a white light into a camera, right? Just like our eyes, you get a flashlight, you put it in our eyes, it's going to blind us a little bit. So you don't want to blind your cameras as well. So be considerate about where you place those white lights as well. And another thing with like motion lights too, you got to remember that's going to take a second for that motion light to turn on. And it's going to probably take a second for your camera to adjust to it as well. So, probably more steady lighting is better than a motion light, but don't let perfect become the enemy of good. I've seen big differences between simple solar lights that they installed in 5 minutes that changed kind of how their night vision works. And then for those who don't want white lights on, who kind of go like, I don't want, white lights everywhere or for whatever reasons, um, there also are external infrared illuminators out there, so they're very similar to the white lights you'd put on and other things, but instead of being white light they're infrared. um, just like we mentioned with before, this is IR is a very reflective light source. I've seen where external infrared light illuminators can like bounce off metal and kind of like cause issues. Just make sure when you're installing that you're checking it. Don't just kind of set it and forget it. Make sure you're also looking at your camera. Make sure you're not blinding it or you're not putting hot spots in places. So, 'cause you don't want somebody to walk in that zone and just be white like a ghost. So. And when you've done that, you've kind of added lighting, or you don't want to add lighting, and you've cleaned them. When all else fails, upgrading, of course, is an option. There's really no better time to upgrade than now. Now that especially now that our most popular models all feature this technology. And the nice thing is like you don't need a new fancy NVR to get this. This Chroma IQ features is right on the camera. It's not like the NVR is processing or anything like that. So you can be strategic about what you choose to upgrade, right? Your key focus areas, where you have maybe the um, most activity, or maybe where you have valuable materials being stored, or the main entrances, the gates, etc. Choose to upgrade those ones first, and then, instead of having to go and be like, okay, now I just have to replace every single camera, right? So, if you have an IP camera system, replacing it could be very, very easy. You can most likely, almost certainly, especially if it's an IP camera, reuse the same cabling. So it's just a matter of swapping out the camera itself. So, um, and you can work with our team to talk about, where you might want to install it, how effective that's going to be. And then depending on, again, your platform or NVR that you're using, there could also be advantages to, in terms of analytics and active deterrence and all those other things. So for the people with the older camera systems, I definitely recommend, we're not going to just tell you to rip and replace every single thing, and we're going to be strategic about, the strategy we'll work with you on. So with that, that brings us to the end of this webinar. The course there. If you have any questions, again, feel free to use that Q&A button that's available on Zoom. You will get a email back with a recording of this, some information on what I talked about in here, that cleaning video, short video as well, and yeah, that's end of it though. I'll wait for some questions, and then Dylan, anything else that you want to add to that?
I think you covered everything. Send the recording after this with links to stuff you talked about. Nice job. I thought that iPhone verse night footage is very powerful. Really cool to see that. You barely see the camera as you're walking up to it, and clear as day on the other end. Really
Yeah.
cool.
And I'll be honest, like when this technology was first starting talk, I started getting introduced to it, I was pretty skeptical just based on that.
Mhm.
So when I first got the first kind of test model out there and I was actually testing it, I was just kind of blown away. And that's why I'm like, man, how do you actually show people like that this is really good without,
Right.
because obviously night vision is one of those things that's hard to quantify and, everyone has a phone. So,
Right.
um, so we got a question that is how to program the cameras to hybrid mode, infrared and white light. Um, so I would, if you do have SCW security cameras, I would recommend calling our security team or support team, and they'll work with you on how to set that up. But typically, at least on our cameras, what you do is you set up the analytic first, so like the line crossing, the intrusion detection, and then you trigger that with that white light. So, but again, you can contact our support team. They'll be happy to walk you through getting that set up as well. But good question. And we'll give it another minute here for any other questions. But otherwise, do appreciate you guys joining us, and we'll see you on the next one. We are going to be talking about access control on our next webinar. So, stay tuned for that if you're looking for either access control for your facility or you just look to replace improve your current system. It's kind of amazing what's out there nowadays and what control can deliver to you. So looking forward to that one. And otherwise, anything else before we jump off, Dylan?
We're good. You covered it. If you guys have any other questions that come to mind later, feel free to just reply to that recording email and we'll jump on it then. Um, or like James said, got a great support team. So if you need help walking through stuff,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys and have a good rest of your week.
awesome.
Take care.
Thanks, James. Yeah.